Hello and welcome to another episode of the New World Comics Podcast. I'm Buck Berlin, owner-operator of this fine establishment. Not with us this week, Stephanie Cerny. She decided that she was too good for us and, just plain doesn't like you.
I'm not a good draw.
Calls it as she sees it. I'm joking. No, she'll be back with us next week. Running this shindig is Drew Stone of Communicore. What's it called? Media Systems. Communicore Media Systems.
Jump cut.
Yeah. We do it live, right? No. Oh, thank God for editing, huh? Anyway, with us this week is Charles Martin.
Hey.
How you doing?
I'm doing good. Doing good. Babies do.
Oh man, that's crazy.
So if I check my phone and run out of the store really quickly, that's probably what I'm doing.
Yeah, we understand. All that. It's this perfect little slice of time in your life.
Yeah,
you're pre-new baby right now.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. My other two babies are legally adults.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, which man, that's
re-upping for a full 18.
Yeah.
It's okay. So I got remarried, and last year April knew that I didn't want another kids, and she was like, "That's fine. I'm happy being married to you." She doesn't have any kids, but then I was doing stock of my life, and I was like, "Well, what do I really want to do for the next, 10 to 20 years of my life? What does that ideally look like?" And oddly enough, I just landed on, having a kid with April. That would be awesome. That would be really, really awesome. And then I talked to my family first, and I was like, I'm thinking about having another kid. What do you think about that? And they're like, April's great. She's going to be a great mom. So I told April last. So everybody else knew that I was like, hey, we're going to have another kid, except for April.
Excuse me.
You all right there, champ?
Yeah, just sneezing.
Okay.
Allergic to happiness.
Right. Yeah. So with the bookshop and everything else going on, it's going to be a heck of a load. But,
actually, before we get into it, because we're already getting into it, tell everyone who you are and what you do for context.
Yeah. So I am Charles Martin. I write under both Charles J. Martin and Charles Martin and Will Wanke. I am the founder of Literati Press Comics and Novels, and we are a progressive and cerebral publishing company. We about 40% comics, 50% novels, 10% miscellanea. And we have a bookshop in the Paseo Plunge in the Paseo Arts District in Oklahoma City. We've been doing the publishing thing since 2010, and we've been doing the bookshop thing for about 3 years now. And we're smaller. We're much smaller than your space, but hyper-focused.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, representation of comics anywhere at this point's great.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it helps too. It plays to our greater mission as a publishing company that there's no significant difference between the stories told in novels and the story told in comics. There are nuances that are definitely going to be different. There are some aspects that are different, but poetry, nonfiction, fiction, comics, they're all just storytelling.
It's a framing structure.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the difference between writing a play, a sitcom, a movie, outside of length, of course, but, framing structure.
And I do believe that we're moving into a future where all readers will be somewhat hybrid. So there will be people who read mostly nonfiction, and there'll be people who read mostly fiction. But I think everybody is going to be reading some fiction, some nonfiction, some comics.
Right.
And hopefully some poetry. But, yeah, poetry is a little bit of a harder sell.
Yeah, I mean, just because, everyone has that high school class where it opens your eyes to it, and, you get 2 or 3 people who are amazing at it and, 20 people that think they're amazing at it.
Well, and that's the biggest issue is poetry has the burden of being kind of the writing form where there are way more people writing than reading.
Yeah.
And but poetry it really is amazing, especially if you're somebody who's like, I would like to read more poetry and comics, man. Those are, and it's not just because it's that you can ingest a full thing in a very, a shorter amount of time, but not feel like you're doing light lifting.
Yeah, well, I mean, with comics, it's pretty straightforward. With poetry, there's the some people that are so into it treat it like it's another language.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like it's this. You know, oh, you didn't get the deep subtleties, you didn't get the extra meaning, you didn't get, you know. And I see where that's off-putting to some people who are trying to get into it. You know, whereas, not to say that there aren't some comics that aren't, that, but by and large, most of them are pretty.
Poetry, and for novel readers though, people who've grown up reading fiction, we have a guy that's at our store that works at our store. He is even more well-read than I am. And I try and read a lot, but I pale by comparison to him. But whenever he first started picking up comics, when he started working at our shop, his name is James, awesome guy, he had to learn how to read comics. Poetry is kind of the same way.
Yeah.
You have to learn how to read a poem, but also you have to, like any reading aspect, is if a poem doesn't speak to you, it's not your fault.
Right.
And that's fine. Some poems will speak to other people. But the beautiful thing about a poem is you read it and then reread it and reread it under 15 minutes, but it's something that can resonate for the rest of the day or even for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
So it is, there's epic poems and, things like that, but that's a little bit different.
And there's tons of just the super vapid stuff, and then it's, just like there's tons of superhero comics that like, hey, Superman's fighting Lex Luthor again this issue.
Yeah.
Or then there's the, oh no, here's him, talking about world peace and what it means to him, and those are two vastly different stories.
Yeah, and ideally, our bookshop, so that goes into what we're really wanting from our bookshop is we're able to curate it in a way and represent the titles in a way that we might be able to break down some of those barriers. So people who don't read poetry or don't read comics or don't read fiction might feel a little bit more comfortable taking a chance in a new writing medium, with a little bit of guidance from us.
Right, and being the smaller space that you're in, you can be more intimate with the conversation that you have with them. Mm-hmm. Oh, well, let me tell you about, this.
Yeah.
Then you can talk about other experiences, that kind of stuff. Whereas, sometimes I'll have 20, 30 people in here and I can't necessarily give that time. I try to.
Yeah.
but
it's a little bit different.
Yeah.
And your selection is significantly larger.
Yeah. So, so we definitely cater to you're brand new to comics. We have practically everything. Whereas, you'll do the, tell me more about yourself, and then I can find.
Yeah, Kristen, who used to work with us, she went off to start her own poetry publishing company. But she did this sign as a joke, book recommendations based on your tattoo. And, man, that was a hit. People loved that. And it was sometimes a little bit of a stretch because there's only so many recommendations you can do for a Tweety bird. But,
Well, yeah.
it already kind of focuses it in one direction. But those are the kind of things we really want to have conversations with the people who come in, and we have times where we're a little bit stretched with how many people are in there. But that's, we're a slow, quiet bookshop, and that's really what we want.
Yeah, and I think that everyone would be more than understanding with that.
Yeah, and and you can't, as you can't beat Amazon. You can't beat it.
No, and that's where you have to be, faster, louder, crazier, better. As I tell everyone, you're selling yourself more than that, and you're selling entertainment. So by God, you have to be entertaining.
Yeah. Well, and we're also acting as a filter, which is important too. Mm-hmm. So especially whenever you come into a shop like this, where you do have so much stuff, I am the kind of shopper that does not want to spend 3 hours trying to figure out what to get. I want to come in and I want to be able to have a conversation with somebody and say, this is kind of what I'm looking for. Just point me in the right direction. I trust your judgment. And that's something that whenever I was really trying to educate myself about comics, that was something that made New World so valuable. Mm-hmm. And so that's what we want to do on our side too. I love it when people come in and like, well, I used to read a lot. I'm trying to get back into it, but I just don't know what to read. And it's like,
and I love that so much because it's what did you love about it as opposed to what did you used to read?
Yeah.
Because just because you read only Hulk books. You know, it's the what did you love about the
Yeah.
Hulk book? Was it the violence and the implications of what he's doing? Was it the intellectual battle with himself? What did you like? And it's we can go so many different ways here.
Yeah, and then you put a title in their hand that they would have never read in any other way, and then they read that, then they get to become an advocate for something to other people.
Right.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I just love book people in general, so it's nice to be able to do this as a thing.
So is that kind of what kicked off Literati? Like what started the process with Literati as a publishing company, or just the whole genesis of it?
Well, I've always wanted to be a writer. I've always been a storyteller, and when I went through college, it was at a time where the publishing industry was right on the cusp of major upheaval, but it hadn't happened yet. We were starting to understand that it was coming, but that was still during the massive book boom where you had Barnes and Nobles and Borders everywhere. You had novelists coming in and making these crazy book deals, and it was an unsustainable industry. But the traditional route was always to get an agent, go through the New York or LA systems to get to your publishing house, and then you move on. But I lived in Oklahoma, and those routes weren't available to me. So I spent a good amount of my 20s trying to figure out what the industry looked like from being inside the state, and I couldn't find any way to crack it because I didn't write hard genre, and those are the kind of things that you have a little bit more of an opportunity in Oklahoma, and I don't write that. I write more oddball stuff. So it came to a point where I found an opportunity to get the dominant hand out and learned a lot of things, but mostly what I learned is I can do most of this stuff myself. I don't really need a publisher because you do most of the work yourself anyways. So I was like, well, okay. I also don't want to be on my own, just self-publishing, just only my thing. So maybe we try and build a system where the things that I learned, we can utilize that to help other people. So I'm putting out my stuff, but I'm also putting out other people's stuff. And my wife at the time, Karen, was wanting to put out comics. She'd always been kind of interested in it. She's a really fun artist. And I was like, well, I really like comics too, so we can do both. I mean, there's nobody to tell us no at this point, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. So we put out Edward and the Island in her Worldwide Tribune, and we had a few other titles coming in around that time. And honestly, it started off on Microsoft Word and Publisher and drawing on copy paper and just trying to figure it out through a series of missteps. And eventually, just over time, we got a little bit better and a little bit better. But what we were always good at is understanding what good storytelling was.
Interesting.
And so we were able to draw on a lot of good storytellers and try and mentor them to a point where they were able to put out something and maybe move on with their career.
Yeah.
We never made any money, but we never lost that much money either.
Right.
That was the goal.
Now, did you ever have to turn someone away with listen, man, this
Constantly.
is
Constantly. Well, and what we try and do, whenever somebody comes to us and they come to us in earnest, and we're not able to work with them for various reasons, like we don't publish poetry. I don't know how to sell poetry.
Yeah.
And we sell it in the store, and I'm trying to get better at it, but it's still difficult. It's just a different beast. And there's also not a lot of poetry buyers, and poetry buyers already have their stores, but we want to have it represented.
Right.
Because, it's a fantastic medium and it deserves representation. But anyways, so we don't do poetry. We don't do hard genre stuff. We have a very specific focus, because when you do the things that we do at the level that we do them, you can't be all things to all people.
Right.
And if you try and do that,
you burn yourself out.
Your table is meaningless. So somebody comes up and they see an array of books, and you got like a religious, spiritual kids book over here and a cookbook over here, and it's just chaos.
Yeah.
There's no filter. And small publishing companies have to be a filter.
You don't want to look chunky, and you don't want to look homogenous.
Right.
You know.
So we have a very specific palette for what we want to put
Yeah.
out. We like the subversive, we like progressive, we do like genre storytelling because we have horror and superheroes, but we will like see them done in ways that we've never seen them done before.
Right.
And if it is within that realm, then at that point we're going to at least take them a little bit more seriously. If it's outside of that realm, we'll say, well, this isn't quite what we do. We appreciate you coming to us. Even when we say no, we want to make sure that we leave that door open, that they can ask follow-up questions and we can give them advice on where to go from here. So we're not just saying, okay, well, we're pushing you back out in the cold, because that is what happened to me, and I don't want to do that to other people.
That's how you create supervillains. I've read about those.
So ultimately, like, really what we want to do is we want to build a better literary community within the state. And we need people writing in all the different facets, even stuff that doesn't fit within Literati. So we do often help mentor people through the process, even whenever they put out stuff without our name on it. So whenever somebody comes to us, sometimes we'll just say, "Hey, I want you to publish our book," and that's the email.
Oh,
and we're like,
that's pretty bold.
I mean, it is. And then I will. Whenever something like that happens, I'll respond was like, well, traditionally publishers don't respond well to this kind of email, but whenever you do email, think of a elevator pitch. This is how you basically do this.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll shoot that to them, and sometimes they'll come back and be like, well, this is what it is, and be like, okay, well, that sounds fine. It doesn't sound for us. Or if it does, it's like, well, this is close enough. Send me a
like a sample or
yeah. And if it's a comic book creator, we're generally going to want to bring them a little bit closer into the fold, because creating a comic book is a very specific process that's very difficult to explain.
Yeah, it's way more involved than like sit down on your typewriter and hope for the best.
Yeah. And there's also like our comic book culture from a creator's side is still in development. So we want to make sure that we're doing everything we can to get more people creating comics, even if they don't come through us, which is part of the reason Ink and Draw is so helpful, which is on Sundays.
Well, yeah, I have that on the list to get to.
Yeah. But, anyways, so, okay, they send us a sample. The sample's not good. We'll say, well, there are a lot of issues here that you need to bring in a professional editor to start working with, to start developing on this, and this. And
what would you say some of those mistakes would be?
Man,
or what are some of the biggest mistakes or most common mistakes? So,
as it turns out, we're actually Rebecca Rutledge and I are developing an editor website called charlesjonathanmartin.com. We decided to use just my name because male names are more respected by authors than female names are.
Wow,
which is kind of crazy. And it was, whenever she said that, I was like, "Are you sure?" And she's like, "Oh yeah." So having your name there speaks to authority in a way that's very unsettling, but unfortunately that's the industry that we're in.
Yeah.
But she's actually a better editor than I am. But anyways, so on this, we do all these lists of things you can do to prep your book for editing. So there are things like point of view, especially, well, in any form of storytelling, once you have a narrator telling a story, it always has to be that narrator. And if you change POV, it has to be for a really good reason. Otherwise, it's very confusing and frustrating. There are some people will be really good at world building, and their characters are really flat. Some people will be really good at characters, but their narration is really underdeveloped, or their dialogue's unbelievable, or they have no voice yet.
Yeah.
There are so many things, but usually within a couple of pages, you can see if something's been polished or if it hasn't. And at that point, pretty much everybody needs to be working with a professional editor when developing something, especially like a novel, but even a comic book, because unlike every other art form, there is no stylistic flourishes to writing. A mistake is a mistake is a mistake. And every reader knows it. And they see it and they stop. And we'll usually go over it, but the more mistakes there are, like you only get that one first impression with a reader.
Yeah.
And if they bought this book that's going to take them a week to read or even longer, and your first page is riddled with errors, they're never going to read anything by you again.
How long do you think the average reader goes before they determine, oh, this isn't for me? 2-3 pages? Do you think they give a full chapter? What do you think?
Boy, that's interesting. For myself, if within 30 pages, if I'm not hooked, then I'll give up on a book. Some people are probably even less. Now, if it's considering whether to buy it,
yeah.
Once you've bought it, it's a little bit different because you've got this investment, or even checked it out from the library. You're like, well, I have it now, so let's just power through. But if they're looking at it, they'll look at the back of the book. They'll look at the front of the book, then they'll look at the back of the book, and maybe they might look at that first page, and that's it. That's all you have.
Yeah. Which I mean, I do that too. Like, I mean, honestly, that's kind of how I would go about it, because if you can't write a concise enough descriptor of the book,
that's a bad indication of what's inside.
Right. And then that first page, it's got to wow me.
And there's some really good books with bad covers. But that...
Oh, don't I know?
Yeah. But usually you can, as the cliche goes, judge a book by its cover, because if they're not willing to put the effort into the cover, then what's inside is probably not going to be much better.
Right.
But then you get to that first page, and honestly, if you are a writer and not written a first page where something significant happens, you need to rewrite that page. You just have to. You absolutely have to. And that's... You can say what you will about the modern reader, but storytelling is entertainment.
Right.
It is absolutely entertainment, and you have to treat it like that. It is something where significant things can come from that entertainment, and it is an art form.
Yeah. Even nonfiction, it needs to be treated. Yeah.
Yeah, it's all entertainment. We're not here doing this because it's going to, increase our livelihood. We're not doing it here because this is a critical component of us being a good person. We're doing this because it's entertaining to us. It's something that, it's something that, I don't know, enriches our lives.
Right.
So write an entertaining book. And if you write the first page and it's all just a description of this pond that you're looking at from your back apartment window, you're going to lose so much of your readership. And, your mom might really like that book, but nobody else is going to.
How hard is it to tell a writer to rewrite something? Like, I mean, I could see where rewriting, a paragraph or two wouldn't be that difficult. But I mean, like, if it's your overall structure needs this.
It really isn't that hard.
Oh, yeah?
I think there's a difference between the way that an editor looks at these things and the way that normal people do. For us, it's like, okay, so this is absolutely an exaggeration, but in the same way that a doctor would talk to the parents about a sick kid that needs to get his shots, that's kind of the way it is. Like, this writer has this very valuable thing that the person loves dearly, this book that it's written, and this book is sick. And this book can be healed, but you have to put in the work. So my loyalty to an editor is not to the writer. My loyalty is to the story. And it is harder not to say something than it is to say something.
Interesting.
Because if I don't say it and that bad book goes to market, that's partly on me.
Now, the editorial style that you have, do you just point out all the flaws and say good luck, or do you give some example of, like, let me show you a rewritten version of this paragraph or chapter, or a few lines, just to give them an idea?
There's different types of editing. So I'm a good top-down big picture editor.
Okay.
That's the reason I work with Rebecca. She's a really good details editor. So you have critiques, which are going to be different than line edits or copy editing. Copy editing is whenever you get down to the commas. With beta reads and critiques, you read the entire thing, and you're like, okay, here are your structural issues. Here are the problems with your character development, with your theme. These are all the things that need to be fixed, and here are some ways that you might be able to do it. But here are the bad things that happen if you don't. And then once you get from that, so you start with this kind of satellite view of the book. And then once you get those fixed, then you move down into the paragraph view. in the chapter view, and then you get down into the line view, and then you get down to the actual words. And the reason you do that is on your first read, whenever you're talking about, okay, this is a time travel book that jumps timeline 30 times, and that's just not going to work. And also you have this comma here.
Then
that book is going to get rewritten so many times because of this edit. Don't worry about the
comma. Yeah. Okay.
You might, like, in the midst of it, be like, okay, well, you use a comma here and you're violating this specific rule, so just keep an eye on that in the future.
Right.
But that's really what you do. And a really good edit for both comics and novels, at least in my view, and the way that I tend to do it, it's like a master's class. It's a one-on-one master's class where you're teaching basic storytelling and grammar. And whenever you work with a team of editors rather than just one person, then you get multiple eyes. And every time I read your manuscript, I become a little bit more blind to it. So I'll take those first views of it whenever I'm working with structural issues. That way, when Rebecca comes in, she's coming in with fresh eyes, and she doesn't have to focus on all these massive mistakes. She's focusing on line flow and voice and all those beautiful fine touches that really make for a good novel.
Is it harder to reread something after it's after you've given your notes and done that? Is it harder to read it again with trying to give it a fresh set of eyes? Like, do you have to look for the things that you're missing, so to speak? Or
yeah, well, you're never going to be able to come back to a story with completely fresh eyes.
Right.
That first virgin read is critical, which is why whenever somebody comes to us with a story that they want edited, at first we do a sample edit of, I don't know, the first 15 pages or so, and we'll point out all their bad mistakes, all their bad habits, so that they can fix all that stuff.
And hopefully they take that as, oh, well, I should do this in the rest of...
Exactly. They fix it throughout the manuscript, so all these easy mistakes, all the low-hanging fruit, they can fix themselves, so we can really work on the stuff that matters. But if we're having to teach you basic grammar and, I don't know, punctuation, then we're going to get so stymied by that. We're going to completely miss all the big stuff that really does make a great story great. So we really want to limit the amount of passes that we have to go through, because every pass we take, our ability to edit that book gets weaker.
Is diminished. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I've always wondered that, and it's a superstar editor has to be able to, segment that or have that, that encyclopedic knowledge of the everything.
Well, and Rebecca really is that person. I'm the big story character guy, and she's the one she's the Dreyer's English kind of, loves the beauty of the English architecture.
Interesting. Now, does she ever have to, understand that something isn't right, but it works for the context of the story, and have to...
There are styles, and actually part of the way that she edits, she actually develops a style book for that specific novel, whenever they are violating certain rules, but they're doing it consistently in a way that still works. So, anything becomes right if you do it consistently.
Right.
And so they'll do a style book, and that style book will also be in there, and we're like, okay, well, here are things that technically you're doing wrong, but I think are fine, but just know that these are technical violations. And it's good for a writer to know that, because if they don't know it, they might want to go ahead and fix that, because if we're seeing it, other people are going to see it.
Yeah, and it might hurt them later in the long run.
Or at least they are aware. So whenever somebody's like, oh, yeah, so you don't use the Oxford comma, huh? It's like, well, I don't use it because I have this well-thought-out reason, which is really just me just covering up. I was too lazy to fix it.
It's really funny you bring that up, because I got into an argument about it, because it seems that those of us of a certain age are beholden to this Oxford comma.
Right.
And then others are just no. Things are different now because of technology. Yeah. Yeah,
they make them read Eat, Shoots, and Leaves. That's a good book to explain to you. The title is about why Oxford commas need to be there, and various rules of grammar. And it's kind of a funny book. But the story is literally a panda eats, shoots, and leaves. And depending on where the comma is, it's either shoots and leaves the food product, or comes in, eats something, shoots an arrow, and leaves.
Yeah.
Yeah. So so that's why punctuation is still important.
Yeah.
It's not always negotiable, and usually not.
Right. But
And comics seem like the editing may not be as necessary because it's a visually directed format.
I look at it as a completely different beast. Like
Yeah.
it's your written word is more, here's your frame structure to your house. And that's the basis for it. Then you get your art, and then your other text is what paints the walls and makes it look like an actual house,
For me, I think editing comics are approaches is not the same, but approaches editing poetry. The words, you need to become a little bit more of a wordsmith, because you may have a full page with only 5 words, and those 5 words have to make sense.
Yeah.
Because they're out on an island all on their own, and they have to be able to stand on their own. You've got sometimes only dialogue to tell your story, dialogue and imagery. And if your dialogue is trash,
Yeah.
it's
I
terrible.
hope you have the most phenomenal artists.
Yeah, exactly. So the editing
even
becomes
then,
important.
yeah.
But even more so, if you have an editor work on your script, that editor is going to save you a lot of time, because they're going to be like, oh, you've just used 5 pages that you're going to have to spend a total of 40 hours drawing to develop this one storyline that's completely not working.
Yeah.
Let's fix that first before you waste all that time, because you get comic book writers and artists who manage to churn through that hellish process of getting a comic done, and then they look at it afterwards like, yeah, this didn't work.
Right. Well, and what's the biggest mistake with that? Is it just plowing through and starting art and everything too early, or do you think it's I don't know.
There are some storytellers who are born from the earth, able to do comics just beautifully, like are able to tell really good comic book stories.
Yeah.
Like any other storytelling. But a lot of comic book artists that are trying to tell their own stories are used to, they think visually, but they don't necessarily think as well in story. So there's aspects of world building, character building, story logic that don't come as naturally to them, and they need a little bit of help. And that's whenever you're about to invest in a 20-page, if you're moving at a good clip, that's 160 hours. If you're about to invest that much time in it, you need to make sure that script is ready.
Right.
And because man, think about spending 160 hours on something and realizing that it doesn't work. And there's artists that have redrawn comics, artists that I know that have completely redrawn comics because they were so dissatisfied with the first time around, and an editor will help you with a lot of that. Or they get to the second issue and they have all these problems, and they're having to fix all these problems in the second and third issue rather than being able to just advance the story.
Right. And I appreciate, someone who's willing to put in the time and effort to make their product. At the end of the day, you're making your product, your art.
Yeah.
That much better for the person you're trying to entertain, as opposed to, I'll go with it and fix it along the way.
Yeah.
Like that sounds horrific to me.
Yeah. We always, whenever we have new comic book artists coming in, we always like 6 pages. Keep it at 6 pages. Do a 6-page story. You're going to make mistakes, and you can make mistakes on a 6-page story. And then whenever you get those out, that was actually Cole who did the Infinity Corridor, which just came. Quantum Corridor? Infinity Corridor. Just came out through Literati. He came in, and I gave him that same advice. I was like, he has this idea for this sweeping Western sci-fi saga. And I was like, don't do that first. Do a short comic, because you're going to make a lot of mistakes. And he's a trained oil painter. He's really, really, really skilled at art.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, let's get some of these, get some of these mistakes out of the way and something that you don't care as much about. So that way, if it's terrible, you can at least walk away and have a learning experience. So let's do like 6 or 8 pages. Just you figure it out. And he's like, okay. And we were working on his graphic novel throughout the whole process, independent of this.
Yeah.
And he ended up like just showing up one day with a 20-page comic that is fantastic.
Yeah.
And I was just like, ugh. Eric Osborne loves him so much, but hates how good he is.
Oh, he's great.
Oh yeah.
I love him. But yeah, no, I think that there's doing a short story, doing a 2-page, a 4-page, a 6-page story shows more skill, more artistic talent than being able to put out a whole graphic novel. If you're able to capture an entire story, put everything that's needed in those few pages, man, you really have something.
Yeah, you have to develop characters, you have to develop conflict in a very short time window, and that's really tricky to do.
Right, and I mean, if you understand the basic storytelling as well as you should to write that, like if you're a professional writer who's going at this to be professional, you need to be able to pull all these tricks out of your hat.
Yeah, and so I think the hard thing about this kind of area of art or hobby or skill is so many other ones. Like if you pick up a guitar and you're like, I want to learn how to write songs, we all understand that we're going to be terrible at the guitar for a very long time and be terrible at writing songs. But that's okay. That's part of the process. But when somebody is like, okay, I've never written a novel before, I'm going to write a novel. They don't understand you have to write really bad novels first to understand how to write good novels. I wrote 6 before I published my 7th. And I did multiple drafts of every single one of those. And it just takes a long time to learn those skill sets. And I wrote so many short stories, so much really bad poetry. It didn't matter how much poetry I wrote. I still never got
It's
good
just
at it.
it's the practice before you become a master.
Yeah, I never got it. I'm not a wordsmith, so I'm never going to be a good poet. But
and there are some people that are good at a thing. Excuse me, good at a thing just right off the bat. They pick it up, and
those are the people who quit.
Well, sometimes some some people pick up a baseball bat and hey, they're a pro the rest of their lives.
Yeah.
There's some people who pick it up and it's it's fun, but it's just too easy for me and they quit. Yeah. But no, there really is that, but it's almost a harsher judge for those because they're the people that have put in the effort and all and the work behind the scenes that you don't see before they put out their work, or you have the people who are publishing everything that they do all the time, no matter what.
Yeah.
So the person who's been at this 10 years trying to put out their first thing is now on the same footing as the person who started last week and was able to make it to the coffee shop. So I understand the frustration, whereas obviously with the person who's playing guitar, you can tell pretty quick that they're brand new.
Well, you can tell the same way with writing. Like you can even tell by the emails that you get. But we want those people to continue working towards it.
Right.
We want them to do it in the right way, and it's hard to explain to somebody who is so eager to start telling stories that they have to slow down and they have to write more and they have to read more.
Right.
It is shocking how many people will come to us wanting to publish a book that don't read books.
Yeah.
It is shocking. And so that's always the first thing when we start talking about. And if they're not able to start rattling off their favorite writers and the books that they're really excited about, we're just like, well, you're not serious.
The times that people come and ask me about, hey, I have this idea for a story. I have this and here's the whole plot. And I'll ask them just kind of basic things like, who's the bad guy? Who's the good guy? What's the worst thing that could happen? What happens if that happens? Yeah. And they're not able to point those out. It's maybe you should.
Yeah. Well, and that's why you bring in a writer. Artists have a tendency to think set piece to set piece to set piece,
right.
And that's great. But you still need a strong story. And if you don't, you have a beautiful comic that doesn't really resonate with anybody. And there's a lot of those.
Yeah.
And you bring in a writer who's able to do that. But at the same time, like, even even the comics that are more ugly but still do well, like, your Scott Pilgrim's Hyperbole and a Half, they have a very specific style that works, perfectly for the kind of story that they're doing. But, there's not a lot of Natashas out there that are able to do their own story on their own. Like, I still edit Heathen, but I don't have to edit her with a heavy pen. She's just gifted.
Yeah.
But she still had to do the comic with Jackson Compton, and she still had to do some short one-off comics and zines to really get her mind around the comic format.
Yeah.
But she's one of those rare comic book creators who really is as good at the art as she is at storytelling in general.
Yeah, and she's when you talk to her, she's not your traditional comic book fan.
Yeah.
Yeah. She just kind of decided that this was the way to go.
Yeah. So. And she did her homework. Like she.
Oh yeah. I'm not saying that.
No. I think that was one of the interesting things. She grew up or she was living in a small town when she started going this route, and she was going to the comic book shop, and she's like asking the guy, okay, well, what are good female-led comic books I should be reading? And the guy's just like, oh, there's not.
I don't know, Wonder Woman. Yeah.
Oh, they're just not producing anything. It's like, well, what about? I saw something about Miss Marvel, and he was like, oh, that's a terrible comic.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and so she managed to keep going and finding those good comics to then base it around. When you and I had the conversation, whenever I was like, hey, my wife at the time is wanting to put out a comic. What are the comics she should be reading? And we spent an hour going through your collection, and you just gave me a really good stack of comics to take back to her.
Yeah.
To start going through. And that's the kind of stuff that we have a comic book writer named Ophelia she's working on a story right now. And she came in wanting to start working on comic book art and start reading a little bit more in the way of comics. And, that was what she, came to Eric and I and said, what are the comics I'm not reading that I need to be reading? And she ended up developing a comic book club. And she did that for, she's been doing this for about a year and a half before she started her own comic. So, like, whenever you can run into storytellers like that, same way with novels.
Yeah.
That are like, I enjoy this. I may not read as much as I need to, but now that I'm wanting to do this, I'm going to read a lot. Those are the ones you can work with.
Yeah.
They have an opportunity to do something really interesting.
That's really cool. So something that you recently got into, and I think is just absolutely fascinating because, I'm into, almost every aspect of comics. The one thing that I've always thought, oh my God, that's the most tedious thing, lettering.
I love lettering.
Yeah, which like to me, it's the, oh my gosh, someone likes anchovies and black licorice. Like that's what I think, because I mean. My handwriting is atrocious, and that's probably why I always think like think like that. And
I don't letter by hand. I letter digitally.
Oh, do you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Only fools letter by hand.
I don't know, man. I've seen some. I like.
Oh, I'm not saying it can't be done well. Yeah. I'm just saying that is the idea of trying to letter by hand and getting through an entire page to realize you misspelled there. Like, I don't know what kind of masochistic person is like thinking that's a thing. I do it digitally.
Yeah.
Which most everybody is doing at this point.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't realize that was a thing because until several years after I saw. Sorry, let me back myself up. I was out at San Diego Comic-Con back in like 2005 or 6, and like. At the time, you just walk up to any artist and there's just groups of everyone behind tables and you'd be talking to, some superstar artist and, right next to them is their buddy sitting there lettering a page while talking to them.
Yeah.
And like, they're barely paying attention. They have their dialogue notes on the side and they're just, and you kind of look over and they're not wanting to show their art, but they're willing to show, yeah, look, I am drawing a thing.
Yeah.
And it's just fascinating. And then,
the control necessary for that.
Yeah.
And so whenever I was in journalism now, first in high school and middle school, they were, I learned like the way to like pace out the size of a space and how that would work with individual letters. But you have to have tremendous control.
Yeah.
Tremendous control. And have tremendous control doing something that does not pay. Now, sound effects, You can do those. I mean, they're all done digitally, but a lot of those you will digitally draw versus just using a font. You can use a font and modify it, but it's not as effective. But yeah, the benefit of going digital versus by hand is so significant unless you are just one of those rare geniuses that can just look at a space and know exactly how to draw it out.
Oh, I don't doubt that at all. Like when I saw the guy doing that, I was like, you must be the master of like making big, car wash signs, whatever. Because I mean, everyone always starts with the big letters and then tapers in. Imagine that on the scale of a comic book where you have so much dialogue that has to fit in this balloon. You can't cover up their face. You have to,
Well, and the reason I warn everyone away from hand lettering is you don't know that the way you phrased it in the script is the way you actually want it. I've rewritten pages based on the art. I'll have it played out in one way in my head, and then the art comes back, and then the artist just knocks out this one facial expression that is so beautiful and so emotive that I rewrite the entire page to make the most out of that one specific image.
Right.
And whenever you hand letter, you're limiting your ability to do that. You're limiting your flexibility.
Yeah.
And as a storyteller, I don't want to do that. I want to always have flexibility to change the story all the way up until it goes to print. So that's why I letter digitally also. Like, I think it's insane, the letter by hand.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it is. And when I saw it done in person, they were like the old hands at in the comic industry. Like, I'm pretty sure that they could be jogging and still lettering. Like
it's magical almost.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
It's like the stuff that Howard Shakin.
Yeah.
I'm not a huge fan of his storytelling, but man, his lettering and sound effects are just like that. I will never be that good, but I see that, and like I've tried to ape it a couple of times, or not ape it, but like see there's this one specific effect that he does that I'm like, oh, that's so good. I can't do that, but maybe I can do a scaled down version of that.
Yeah.
But seeing that kind of stuff, like that really is really so impressive. Anyway, so lettering, the reason that I really like lettering is you are the last person who touches the page.
Yeah.
You're the last person who touches the words. And lettering isn't just copy and paste from the script. A lot of it is you are controlling the pace of the storytelling through the way that you place the bubbles.
Yeah.
How big is the pause? How is it spoken? What volume is it spoken? Is all things that you control.
Yeah, and breaking up the where it lands on the page too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's really satisfying way of really controlling the pace of the page. And also like being able to work around the art, and it's, I don't know, I really enjoy it, but also it's the kind of thing that I can do with other things happening in the background, and there's just nothing else that I do in any phase of my life that that can go in the background like that. So I can like be watching a movie and lettering a page for awesome. Hours, and it's great. It's great because you can't write and do that.
Yeah.
And it's very meditative.
Yeah.
And it's nice because I can't do art. I can't. Well, I mean, I do, but I do it badly. I do art as badly as I do poetry. So like, I wouldn't ever seriously try and do the art of my own comic. But I can do the lettering, and I'm getting better. I still got a ways to go, but I'm getting better.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Man, yeah. I mean, there's a lot that I've done. Working on friends' stuff and all that. Like I found that I enjoyed inking, but I don't love it. But man, lettering, I
love it. And send me your lettering jobs.
Oh yeah. So I want to talk more about some of the difficulties or great triumphs of having Literati. Particularly, man, tell me the craziness around Heathen.
Yeah. So Natasha of Heathen fame, She, I encountered her first because she was doing the comic with Jackson.
Yeah, the illustrated girl.
Illustrated girl. And I was really impressed with her art style. And we were doing Literati Presents at the time, which is an anthology of comics and fiction. And I told her, I would love you to do something for Literati. We can get you a script for a story if you want, or if you want to write something on your own, whatever you want to do, just let us know. And she was like, I think I want to try and write my own story. And I was like, okay, great. In my head, I was like, we're probably gonna have to fix this, but it's fine. Her art's great. I'm sure this will be fine. And she ended up sending me the script of it's a dystopian future featuring suicide. And it was awesome. And I was astonished. I was like, there's no way that she is this good at both art and storytelling.
Yeah.
So, and there was some little editing that needed to be done, but nothing on the scale of what I would normally have to do with most comic book writers or comic book artists. And the story turned out great. And I said, well, is there anything else you're thinking about doing? And she's like, I have this Viking story that I've been chewing on. I was like, well, we don't really do fantasy stuff, but let me at least take a look at it. And then she sent me issue 1. I was like, I was mad. I was mad at how good it was. I was mad at how good it was. And I knew it right away. I was like, this is just gonna be a great, great comic. And I didn't know it was gonna become what it became, but it didn't surprise me. It was that good a comic that if it just got in front of somebody, they had to be a really bad comic book reader not to realize what it was.
How long from issue 1 coming out did you know that you had a hit? Like you knew that it was going to work, but how long until it you felt like it hit?
Yeah, our special orders were our pre-orders were beyond anything we've ever had before or since. So it was immediate. Like we knew we were onto something. And so issue 1 comes out and it was a massive success. Issue 2 came out and it was still really big. There's always that tapering off.
Yeah.
Issue 1 hits big. Issue 2,
it's typically half of your issue 1.
Yeah, and people are starting to wait for the trade to come out.
Yeah.
But it was still huge. And issue 1 was ticking up and up and up and up. So it wasn't like a huge release and then a tapering down. It was a huge release and it continued just skyrocketing.
Right.
And every time we thought it would slow down, and it just never did because something else would happen. Like AV Club would do something, Ellen would do something on it. And it was just an onslaught. Her ground game on Twitter was perfect. It should be taught in colleges. Like she could not have done a better job of prepping this. We did what we could, but she sold that comic, not us.
Yeah.
And so we got the first trade out. We just could not keep up.
Oh, I remember because I remember asking you to do a special printing for me for Free Comic Book Day. I was like, I need tons of these.
Yeah.
So.
And there was just we just couldn't keep up. And it was me, I was the infrastructure of Literati, and I was mailing off 40, 50 comics a day. Mm-hmm. And I was trying to figure out how to get comics in Australia and how to do all these deals. Like my thought was like, well, maybe if I can just find printers, I can just send them the files and they can print and send. And those were the kind of things I was trying to organize while working 3 jobs, and dealing with kids and trying to do all these other things. And the Paseo Plunge had popped up around that time too. And I knew I was not going to be enough to represent that title like it deserved to be represented.
Right.
So I started talking with Natasha. I was like, I think now's the time we need to move this to somebody else who has better infrastructure than I do. So I helped her pitch it, and Vault ended up taking it, and it continues on, like just doing gangbusters. Every comic she writes is better than the comic before, and I still edit them, so I still get to see them months ahead of anybody else, and it's really exciting.
Which it's fun that it ended up at Vault because they have a lot of things that are not too dissimilar from that. Like it all feels like it fits in with their brand of comic.
Yeah, and Heathen's their, there's their standard.
Yeah,
like, that is their big comic. So, it's like a like a shark that grows to the size of its environment. Like Heathen will continue growing, so as long as like it's able to move to a bigger platform. Yeah, and so it's a 12-issue arc, so we're hoping to get through to the end of it soon. And yeah, I am really excited about what happens next. Natasha, I actually I want her to move to just writing. Her art is beautiful and lovely, and I think the artist that is currently doing Heathen is great, but I think, there's no replacing Natasha. But I think she's a better storyteller than she is an artist, and she's an amazing artist.
Yes.
I think she's just gifted. She has this control of human emotion that is unteachable. So whenever I'm editing her, it's a little bit of story logic, a little bit of dialogue, fixing a couple commas, and then like, bravo. She's easy to edit.
That's awesome.
Yeah. It's really frustrating. I wish I did more to earn my place on that title.
Not to ask you to dig up too much dirt or anything, but is there anything that you feel was just an absolute failure or flop, or something that just wasn't worth the time and effort that you put into it, as far as being a publisher?
Yeah. So the thing that we learned early is it is not worth working with writers that are not excited about learning the industry. We want every person we take on. So we're a small publishing company.
Yeah.
We're not throwing around millions of dollars, but we're also not a vanity press either. So we're not going to be charging the authors, exorbitant rates to do all the work for them. We want to make money off of book sales and only book sales. Mm-hmm. We do freelance editing and all that kind of stuff, but that's aside from, Literati. We want to have writers that want to learn everything we know so they don't need us anymore. And they're able to move on. We want everybody to move on like Natasha did, so that whenever they have a weird project that they think might be a good fit, they'll bring it back to Literati. And every time Natasha or Jerry or Murr Winery or any of the people that we've worked with that have managed to make noise outside, every time they move on, that makes the path a little bit easier for the next generation.
Yeah.
I don't want any other storytellers to be lost in the woods like I was throughout my 20s trying to figure out this industry. So the problem that we've run into is whenever we work with a writer or an artist that all they want to do is just have their name in print. Mm-hmm. They have no interest in selling it after that. And we will help those people get to that point, but we won't necessarily put it on the Literati banner.
Right.
And it's nothing against that. Like if that's where your ambition lies, that's fine. You just want it to exist just for the sake of existing. But I also, I don't want people to have wrong expectations of what I'm able to do. I didn't sell Heathen. I didn't make Heathen a hit. Natasha did.
Right.
We helped, but that's all we are. We're just,
you facilitate as opposed to
we're part of her infrastructure. She's not part of ours.
Yeah.
And that's the way we want it with every other writer. Where
you're a tool to be used as opposed to you are the machine.
Yeah, I am a tool.
Yeah. Not what I'm implying.
Yeah. So whenever we run into writers, any type of storyteller that's a little bit like that, where we can kind of sense all they want is just like we had this really fine fellow, really nice, really interesting, who had a book that he wanted us to do, and he's like, well, the name of the book is going to sell itself. I won't have to do anything. And that was an immediate red flag. I was like, no. I mean, I haven't read it. No interest in it. If you think your work is done once you've hit that last, period, then I don't want to have to spend all this time explaining to you why you're wrong.
Right.
I don't have the time for that. And at that point, it's a hobby. That's really what they're wanting to do. They're wanting to write it as a hobby, and that is totally fine. There's nothing wrong with that. And if it's fulfilling to you, that is all that's important. But you're not wanting to be a serious career writer. And that's who we're looking for. We're looking for people that we can help you get started in the industry, and then you go on. And then hopefully you remember us whenever you're gone. You know, I have to sacrifice time for my own writing to do the work that I do with Literati. And luckily I have enough time to do a lot of writing as it is. But, you know, the time that I'm pointing at your project is time I'm not pointing at my own project. Right. So I want to make sure that you're willing to work at this.
Yeah, it's the one thing that, you know, no one can make more of. It's, you know, it's your time.
Yeah. So those are the ones, those are the whenever they go wrong or they're disappointing, and that's usually what it is. It's not about book sales.
Yeah.
We have plenty of titles that we'll put out that will not sell a whole lot because we put out titles that are interesting to us and that we think need to be in the world, not books that are necessarily going to sell.
Yeah, you're putting something out there that you know means something to someone.
Yeah.
And the fact that it meant something to that one person means more than You know,
we're not trying to make a living off of this.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it means more to you that one person. It meant more to one person than 20,000 people read it and thought, meh.
Yeah. Sure. Why not? Yeah. You know, and so, you know, we've also made the mistake early on of putting out stuff that didn't necessarily fit on our table. And that was, you know, that's always a mistake because you're kind of muddling what your brand is. And whenever you're a small publishing company, all you are is your brand.
Yeah.
So whenever people come to a Literati table, they know what they're going to get. And if you don't like that, you know, there's other tables. Our bookshop's the same way.
Yeah.
Like, we'll have people come in that are like, I don't see anything here I want to read. And it's like, you know, that's fine.
Yeah.
You know, there's other bookstores. But then we'll see people come in and we're like, oh, that. Okay, I want to read everything in here. And that's what we're looking for. We're looking to make relationships with. I want to get back to that old school bookstore vibe where, you know, there's 5 or 6 really good bookstores in a city, and each bookstore has its own specialty. So if you're in the mood for this kind of book, you go to this one. If you're in the mood for another one, you go to this one.
Yeah.
So that's what I envision us doing. And as a publishing company, it's no different.
So you bring up the Paseo Plunge, which I want to know more about.
That is a swimming pool in the Paseo Arts District. It was built in the 30s as an open-air swimming pool. Then they put a roof over it. Then it closed. Then it opened. Then it closed again. Then it was turned into a rock venue for a very short time. And then it was closed again. Then it was turned into the spaghetti factory. And then it was closed again. So it closed for the last time in '79. And it was this eyesore in the Paseo Arts District, which is one of the prettiest neighborhoods in Oklahoma.
Yeah.
It was built to kind of replicate that Santa Fe style. And it's just a beautiful winding street that has had the first gallery in the state, and it's the state's like true arts district.
Yeah.
So this eyesore of a building was renovated by John Belt whenever he finally managed to purchase it from the original owners. He was going to reopen it almost a decade ago, but then he passed away, and his widow, Joy Reed Belt, she took it over and decided she wanted to finish John's vision for the Paseo, and that included opening up the Red Rooster, which is still the restaurant itself is open, but the rest of the building is still being renovated, and opening the Paseo Plunge. And once that happens, then his vision for the district is complete. So we're in the first stages of doing that. So that was opening up the first half of the first floor. So it's kind of a big gallery space, but it's still a small fraction of what the building actually is.
Right, and you've shown me around, and there's so much more to come. It
goes and goes.
And goes. And I love that building. Like, well, because I at first I only saw, here's this. How quaint! It's like a lot of the other Paseo things. This thing
just goes.
Yeah, which I love places like that.
Yeah. It's one of the regrets I'm going to have whenever that building is finished. So much of the weirdness will, have to go. Like, you just can't find bullet casings all through the building and have that as part of an open to the public situation. That creaky old elevator that is pretty much a death trap.
Yeah.
All that stuff has to go.
Well, like the Paramount downtown when we had the first convention there.
I love that elevator.
Oh, my God.
That elevator is so creepy.
I was talking to someone the other day, and they said that they're getting a new one.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know that, but that makes sense.
But there was something like every 7th or 8th time now, like the lights go out or something. It's just this, well, good thing they have plans for a new one, because
Oh, what I love about so our elevator in the Plunge is a service elevator, and that's
Yeah.
all it was ever meant for. The one in the Paramount used to be a beautiful elevator.
Oh, yeah.
And that was 100 years ago.
Yeah.
It is not a beautiful elevator, and that faded glory just makes it that much more interesting.
It's very, very Silent Hill. Like
Yeah.
but tell me about how did you get involved in the Paseo Plunge?
So, David Daub, who has this comic that he's been doing for years, he wanted to do a teaser, like a cinematic teaser of his next issue. And my son, who was 14 at the time, had just won a couple of awards for a short film he did. And Dave was like, "Well, would Michael want to do it?" It's like, "I don't know. Are you gonna pay him?" He's like, "I'll throw him $100." And I was like, "Yeah, deal." And Michael was so thrilled. So we ended up bringing in Kit and Jackson Compton and a bunch of other people just to fill out the crew.
Yeah.
And we shot this horror movie, and this 15-minute horror movie, however many minutes. We were up on the top of the building with an AR-15 and like 1,000 rounds of bullets and just like buckets of fake blood. And I knew Joy. She had let us use the building for another event a year or two before, and I'd known her just because we were in the art scene. And I just fell in love with the building during that shoot. And at the end, I came back to Joy. I was like, "Man, if you ever open this building, let me know. I want to be involved, however I can be involved." So about 6 months later, she was like, "Charles, I think we're going to do it." And I was like, "Okay, well, how can I help?" And that ended up me being just there, keeping it open as a gallery. And then she's like, "Charles, you should put some books here." So I put some Literati books there to sell, but I was happy just being there in the gallery. And, it was slow going at first. And then I ended up like bringing in some artists on where Holy Rollers Donuts is now, and then brought in a little bit more books. And Joy's like, "You need to open a bookshop." I was like, "I don't know if I want to open a bookshop." "No, I want to open a bookshop." So I ended up opening a bookshop. So it kind of grew out, and so we went from just me in this huge building alone to now we've got art studios on 2 different floors. We have the gallery, we have Holy Rollers Donuts, which is the best donuts in the city, probably the state. And we have these plans for moving forward where we're just going to flush out the entire building as a multi-use art space. And it's great. It's a great home to be in. David and Jennifer Woods own the shop with me. We have James, who has just come in. He was just a guy that was there drinking coffee every morning and loved to talk books. And one day he was like, "Charles, I'll open the bookshop if there's always people looking at it." And I was like, "That's a good idea." So he ended up becoming our first employee. And Kristen Grace was with us for a while too, and she really helped develop the personality of the store. And so we just have this great team of people who are just really, I don't know, it's a shop that really has like an ideal to it.
Yeah.
And that's fun. Like, we make enough sales that we make a little bit of money, but not too much. But it's so spiritually satisfying to have something that is there for a reason.
Yes.
Yeah, as you know.
Oh yeah, no, I get that entirely, and that's why I say, if this comic store isn't your comic book store, that's fine as long as you have one that meets your needs. Because again, it's not for everyone, but it means the most to the people who want it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and that's one of the fun things about our bookshop is that we get a lot of your clientele over there. Mm-hmm. But it's the clientele they come here for comics.
Yeah.
And then they come to our shop for books.
Yeah.
They're not going to come discover new comic titles at our shop, because why would they do that? They have this, and this store means so much to them. And then they come over, for novels on our side, and I love that. I love having a city that is strong enough to support multiple quality bookstores. Full Circle's great, Commonplace is great, Speeding Bullet down in Norman's great. We have so many cool Best of Books in Edmond's really nice too.
We're building community.
Yeah,
and that's, like when I took over, it was I have my own comic book store, and then we were talking before, those moments when you realize that this is more than you. This means, like you're inspiring someone to do a thing, or and it's this isn't just you anymore.
Yeah.
You're building your own community.
Well, people don't look at Oklahoma and think, oh, this is a state of literacy. But we've had amazing writers, both on the comics and fiction and nonfiction side, come out of this state, like a huge amount of them.
Mm-hmm.
And, man, we're fighting for that. That is what we're here for. I was having a conversation at my night job. I, throw stakes at rich people, to allow me to have my own store. And I was talking to some of my guests, and I told them, oh, I have a bookstore. And they're like, well, what are your favorite books? And I rambled, as you do, because you own a bookstore.
Yeah.
And they said, have you ever thought about teaching? Like, the way you talk about books is, I would have loved to have a teacher like that. And I thought about it. And, man, I feel like I am doing more good building the literacy scene by being an energetic bookstore owner than I would as nothing against teachers.
Oh, no,
but I don't feel like that's where my skill's at.
Yeah.
That's not my calling. And we need really energetic, enthusiastic teachers pushing literacy, but we also got to have bookstore owners.
Yeah.
Because if we don't, like, people are just going to go to Amazon.
Yeah.
And that's fine. But, I will buy books off of Amazon too. But that doesn't help engender the deep love and relationship with literacy.
Because you can get on some sort of message board and spout your thoughts and feelings and all that, but it's not the same as connecting to an actual person in person.
Yeah, absolutely. Come into a place that is your neighborhood.
Yeah, and it's funny the times that someone comes in and I'm just having a conversation with someone, and then another person chimes in, and then another, and then it's this big group conversation, and sometimes it lasts all day. That we're having this ongoing conversation, and then like people will come and go throughout the whole thing.
Yeah, I was talking to somebody about, I can't remember exactly what we were nerding out about on books, and there was a group of kind of older teenagers, late high school, that were in there. And they were just kind of coming through, as you do in the Paseo. It's a tourist district.
Yeah.
And one of them just stopped and just slowly turned around and was just staring at our conversation, just like a little puppy dog, just out in the rain, just creaking against the glass, wanting to come in and join. And finally, I was like, "Did you have anything to offer?" And she was like, "Ah!"
Yeah.
Because she was so excited to find community.
Yeah.
Community is so important, and that is something you can find online to a certain degree, but it is just not the same. And there's so many places that offer community, and it's nice to be one of many.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, we're running real close to being out of time. Not that we have a hard set limit, but I don't want to go on too terribly long. But the one thing that I desperately want to get to before we call it a day on this, I want to hear about Glamourella.
Oh, it's so good. Glamourella. So Jerry Bennett, I'm not sure how wide your viewership is that it surpasses Jerry Bennett's name.
I don't think anything around here surpasses Jerry Bennett's name.
So everybody knows Jerry Bennett. Everybody loves Jerry Bennett. Him and Natasha are like the two people. If you know comics from Oklahoma, the two and there's not to say there's not great names out there.
No, you hate everyone else. Got it. Yep.
But they're the Eric. Two kind of Well, you got Rob Volmar too, who's
I know.
So you got it. We've got a deep bench, but they're the two ambassadors.
Right.
Eric will get there.
Or will he? No,
I'm working on his comic. He better. So Jerry has done so much good work, but he's worked for other people's stories, and he told me he had an idea a long time ago. And I was like, well, if you need any help, just let me know. He's like, yeah. I think I'm going to try to do this one on my own. And I was like, okay, no, that's fine. And then about a year ago, he was like, Charles, would you have any interest in writing a comic with me? And I said, I have been waiting so long for you to ask that question. Like, yeah. It was like being proposed to, and you're just like, whee! So of course I said yes. And so we talked about the idea. And worked it out. I started writing scripts for it. And it came out so smoothly and so easy, and the characters he'd already had in mind were so vibrant already that it's been a very easy project to do from a storytelling side, because it's a great idea. And it's superhero stories, the challenge of a superhero story is whenever you're introducing a new one is how do you do it in a way that is necessary.
Right. Well, because I mean, it either feels like, man, I have a new way to look at this, or here's your trope that everyone expects. What's the difference?
Yeah, just with a different set of colors for the uniform.
Right.
Yeah, and that was actually something that I had said to Matt Price whenever Wonder Boy was coming out, and they were like, well, are you ever going to do a comic version of it? I was like, I don't know. Does the world need another superhero comic? And it was pithy and ridiculous, of course. There's always room for more. But that story in Wonder Boy didn't feel like it needed to be a comic, because there's so many comics that kind of fill that same vein. The fact that it was a novel offered me an opportunity to do something different with it. But this story, one of the things I loved about the Wonder Boy serials, writing it was very rarely, the lens was very rarely focused on the actual superhero. It was focused on everybody else.
Right.
So whenever Jerry came to me and told me about his idea of focusing in on the daughter who does not have superpowers, the daughter of a superhero who does not have superpowers and doesn't have any interest in having superpowers, like, what does that look like?
Yeah, because I mean, we've seen that before, except for typically it's the wanting the superpowers.
Yeah. Very
Very rarely do you see them have no interest and not want it.
Yeah. And it speaks, Glamourella speaks to something different. Because of that, it's about, anyone who's a parent, or anyone who's had a parent, understands that there comes a point where you realize you are not going to follow your father's path, or your child is not going to follow your path. There is a rejection of your values, and that's necessary. That's a necessary part of the human experience, but it still sucks. That's what Glamorella's daughter is really about, is this mother who loves her daughter, and this daughter who, loves her mom, and they have two completely different sets of values. And it's about them negotiating that and understanding that. It's about the mother understanding that her daughter's gifts lie elsewhere, and that really is okay.
Yeah.
And that's a hard thing as a parent, where you're used to telling this kid, this is how you're supposed to run your life. These are the things that are good. These are the values you need to have. And then all of a sudden the kid's like, you know what? I think I got this. That's hard. That's hard as a parent. And that's what the comic's about, is about that process for this superhero who is able to do anything but can't control the way her daughter is growing up anymore, because her daughter is now taking it on herself. And that's something I know quite well. I have two teenagers, and they're both wonderful, and they have told me in no uncertain terms that they are capable of running their lives. And the thing is, they will always need me to some degree.
Yeah, but that's success as a parent.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like success. Well, but you're right, it is. But it's a hard process to get through. So the timing of it, how well he had formulated that story in his head already. I came into this and I was like, oh, I know this story. I know how this story feels. And so Glamorella's daughter is named Comet. And Comet is a brilliant little girl who has Asperger's syndrome, and it has a number of social phobias. Just doesn't like really people in general.
Right.
And has one friend that she feels truly comfortable with. And that mostly because that friend has not really given her a choice in the matter. He's just like, I'm there, we're friends, I'm adopting you, you just have to learn how to live with it. And you have these two parents that are no longer married. Glamorella's was brought over into our world. It's a long backstory.
Yeah.
Through this scientist, they fell in love, they got married, they divorced. But they co-parent really well. So it's about a complicated family relationship, where it's not easy for anybody because you're at that age where that child is really starting to exert their own personality. But it works. It still works. Everybody still believes that they love each other. And that kind of conflict where I want the best for you, you want the best for me, we just disagree on what that is really fascinating conflict for me. Just having somebody who has a family, has, families are complicated.
Yeah.
And
more so now than ever.
Yeah. And you don't need to have your child, you don't need to have a hero figure orphan from his family. They don't need deep psychological trauma to make them interesting. It's those small little nuances of the domestic life that are so rife with material. That's why we were talking about Tom King before the podcast, why I love him, because he can tell a story with massive implications on an intergalactic scale. Mm-hmm. But what is really interesting is that relationship and them trying to figure out how to bring a new kid in the world.
Right.
Oh, that's good stuff.
Yeah. Well, and sometimes one of the easy tricks in writing is give a character a small nuance. They're 100 times more relatable than trying to show every good deed that they do now amounts to this, as opposed to no, they always make sure to cross their T and dot the I's. To that nth degree. That speaks more than they've now saved everyone.
Yeah, and and it's fun telling stories where you're really able to get at these characters that are somewhat unknowable even to me as a writer. There's something really very familiar. You're able to find those things that you can latch on to that make them feel like somebody that you know in real life.
Yeah.
But there's always a bit of motivation that the character has become such an organic entity that at some point you're just following the character as a storyteller. And once you get to that point where you feel like that character is now able to propel themselves, it's really satisfying writing.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Now, just to touch on this quickly, just because I'm fascinated by this. Do you ever feel as a writer that you have to make a logical change in what happens to a character that you would rather it see play out one way, but the story has to go one other? Or...
Yeah. And some writers are able to write without outlines. I don't understand how that works. If it works for them, great. It does not for me. I have to have mile markers.
Yeah.
Otherwise, the story starts getting lost. And I'm a very energetic writer.
Yeah.
I like good pace. Pace is absolutely, Hi, Siri. Pace is critical for me. And so because of that, I want to make sure that I'm staying on a good track. Now, the outline can always change.
Right.
And sometimes it does, and often it does. But I always know where my end mark is. And I've got to get to that end mark. Because that end mark, the end of the story is like the closing thesis statement of a story. So everything you're trying to say with this entire story needs to be wrapped up in the ending, and that's what a good ending is. Whenever you don't do that, that's whenever you have a bad ending. So there are times where you have to reel your character back in because you've got to get at this, your pacing has started to struggle, or you're getting too far off track, or you've got this beautiful darling of a scene that you have to kill because it's not feeding the greater story.
Right. Yeah, it breaks up the flow, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not an Alan Moore type that I'm going to spend 30 pages, wandering around a park.
Yeah.
I'm not like that. I don't like writing like that. I want my stories to be tight.
Yeah.
I love writing tight stories.
And there's a time and place for the wandering story, but yeah.
It's still got to serve a purpose.
Right.
And sometimes within his writing, it does, and sometimes it doesn't.
Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes
whenever it doesn't, I'm just like, oh, you can go to hell.
Yeah.
Sorry. No, that's biblical.
Yeah, you're
okay.
Good.
So anyway, there will be times that I have to pull them back in. But the trick is trying to figure out a way to organically lead them back in.
Right.
I've stepped in as a co-writer for Enigma Machine, which is by John Eric Osborne, JEO. He's still arguing with himself over what his name's actually going to be. And that was a thing that we were planning on an issue that has not come out yet, so I'm not going to go into the actual story. The story basic of Enigma Machine is Afghanistan in a kind of an alternate future situation. Afghanistan has managed to uncover massive natural resources, and they become one of the wealthiest nations in the world, still with the Afghanistan war in their backdrop. And the U.S. tries a dirty war trick to try and unseat the ruler who isn't dealing with the U.S. anymore, and it fails. And one of the operatives that failed, his father was helping the Afghanis build up this society that was trying to make themselves invulnerable to the outside world, which had been trampling over that nation since ever.
Yeah.
So his father went in as an idealist. It's like, well, let's use technology to build strong boundaries for you so you can thrive as a nation. And the U.S., as it's wont to do, did not particularly like that. And it went poorly. And the son was one of the ones that went in to pull the father out, and it didn't work. So the story picks up with the son going back in and trying again. And it goes poorly.
Yeah.
Anyway, so the story, we got to a point where we realized, okay, there's a lot of the character motivation and story motivation that was carrying this way, but our ending's over here. So how do we get the organically move over here? And I remember the conversation we had, because my wife was there, April, and Eric and April and I were talking, and then I had to stop talking because like that was a huge trick to try and make it feel like it made sense to get over there. And then eventually, once I got it all unlocked in my mind, I said, okay, what we're going to do is this ridiculous thing that makes no sense to you, but trust me, let me write it first, and it's going to.
Yeah.
And it ended up being a perfect fit. So sometimes like you have to make that jump.
Yeah.
But if you're a good storyteller, you can figure out a way to make it not only organic, but actually better than what you'd initially intended. A good editor will do that to you too. They're like, the scene doesn't work for this reason, you need to do this instead. And you're like, you're wrong. And then you think about it and you're like, you're right.
They're right, yeah.
Anyway, so there's that.
Fair enough. That's awesome. So Glamourella comes out.
Well, so we have a pre-release party in August.
Yeah.
In August
15th.
So that comes out. We have a book fair coming out where we actually have a rush of releases that all of these different projects somehow manage to get finished or look like they're going to get finished.
Yeah.
So we're just like, oh, let's just do one big release on Small Business Saturday, which is in November, right after Thanksgiving. So we've got that and releases from. We'll see who actually gets the projects done, but a lot of them are really right there close. And Bastard Children of Route 66 that I'm doing with Don Rosenkrantz, which is my own story.
Yeah.
That one we are looking at doing. So with Glamourella, that's going to be a pre-release party, and then we're going to get the first issue done, and then we're probably going to shop it, maybe. We'll see. But we're not calling it an official release party.
Okay.
So you get there, if you can buy them at the pre-release party, good. If you can't, you might have lost your opportunity for a while. Bastard Children Route 66 has a release coming out pretty soon too. We're finalizing lettering and final art on that. And that one's kind of Smokey and the Bandit, just a much more progressive version of it. Yeah, that one's I'm really excited about. I think that's a really fun read too. And then we have potential releases from Ophelia, Eric. The next Enigma Machine should be coming out fairly soon. Yeah, so there's a lot of stuff on the horizon.
You have so much going on. It's going to be impossible to keep up with you. But
do your best. That's why we got a bookstore.
Yeah, so we'll definitely have you back. Probably a couple months down the road after the
baby.
Yeah, the baby business calms down.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh,
my
man.
goodness.
Best of luck to you. Man, thanks for being here.
Yeah, absolutely.
I appreciate you so much doing this.
Yeah, I don't come to your shop nearly enough. So.
I agree.
Hey, I get to drink hopefully in another couple of days. So
Yeah.
should do that.
Yeah. Hit me up.
Cool.
Yeah, we'll see. Thank you all so much for listening and or watching, and we'll see you all next week.